Welcome to Tinted Specs podcast. I'm Georgina, and joining me today is Charlotte, Chief Crafter at Funkymakers. Welcome, Charlotte.
Good morning, Georgina. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm so glad I managed to get that out. Chief Crafter. I thought that was so clever. Can you tell everyone about what you do and where you're based?
I run a company called Funkymakers. We're based in Bromley. When I say we, it is just me. But I'm a multi-crafter. I have crafted since I was very young, sort of knee-high. I come from an Irish family of crafters. My grandmother, my great-grandmother, and my mum, they all knit and crochet. So it was mainly my gran who taught me initially to knit, because she had a bit more patience with me. I think grandparents do have more patience with children. I've basically, I think if I'd been steered correctly as a child, teenager, I probably would have gone to and done textiles or fashion for a career, but I didn't. I ended up in the corporate world. And then basically it was only when I had my son, and then got made redundant from work that the crafting sort of came back again. Really, I've always done a little bit, but not as much while I was working in the corporate world. And then when my son started school, I started doing all the craft fairs, the summer fairs and the winter fairs at the school. And I was doing all the crafts, and eventually I was asked if I would be interested in doing some crafts at the school. So I did, and that's how Funkymakers started. Basically was, so I run after school clubs at the school. And I do two different after school clubs. So one of them is Upcycle Recycle, which is making from things that would normally end up in the recycling or in landfill. And the other one is a bit more traditional in the sense of teaching the children knitting, crochet and stitching. So that's where Funkymakers got started. And I also teach knitting and crochet to adults and some other crafts. If anybody asks for a particular craft, generally I can provide it.
Yeah. So as a multi-crafter, could you name the crafts that you do?
I do knitting, crochet, stitching, so embroidery, various types of stitching, little bits of quilting. I do papercraft. I do quite a lot with papercraft. Various other fabric crafts. So I can do things like rug making. Oh gosh,
we're coming up to about 10 already. And so papercraft, I think that's when you fold paper into shapes, is that papercraft?
Yes, so I do a bit of that. I do some card making with kids, and yes, folding paper into shapes. I do paper beads is one of the kids' favorites. So we do lots with paper beads. You can see on my Facebook and Instagram feeds, if you go back a bit, you can see so paper tubes. We make picture frames, photo frames out of them. This Christmas I made some stars, which worked out really well. And also for Valentine's, made some heart cards. And that's just rolling magazine and like pages from magazines, cutting them into strips and rolling them up. So reusing paper that would have been recycled and can still be recycled if, but you've had the creative work out of it, for, in the interim. So, that it provides a way for the children or even and the adults to explore their creativity, because you can make loads of paper tubes and then decide after you've made them what you want to do with them.
So that's a great way as well for them to see how they can reuse the paper that's around them and see it made into something else. And like you say, then they can still recycle it afterwards if they want to. I mean, actually, that makes me think I've got little, not entirely creative, but stars cut out of cardboard that could have been from a toilet roll that I put sprinkly stuff on, and they've been part of my Christmas tree decorations for years and years. Yeah. So they last a long time, don't they? But I guess that's the other thing to remember.
Yeah.
So you're skilled at least 10 crafts, I think more. I also want to talk about the name Funkymakers. Where did that come from?
I was just really trying to come up with a name for my business, and because it was focused on the children initially to start with, I was trying to find something that would work and that would engage the kids. And obviously the first part of Funky is fun, so crafting is fun. So that's how it came about, really, is the fun part of craft and and things being funky. So it's a word that appeals to the children.
Yeah, I think that's great. I actually have a friend whose nickname is Funky, so I think it's brilliant. And behind you is people who are listening on the podcast won't be able to see, but she's got a fantastic banner which says Funkymakers. It's got some pom-poms, buttons, I think, on one of them.
So the K is made totally with buttons.
Rugs, rug kind of, the K is
so
rug?
the bottom K. So there's two Ks. The first one is buttons, and the second one is rug making. Yes. Yeah. And then we've got some on the or some sashiko, Japanese sashiko stitching.
So that's a type of stitching, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a type of stitching that the Japanese use to decorate sort of it's mainly on denim or indigo fabrics.
Yeah. Well, just that banner really shows how fun Funkymakers can be, or doing crafts can be. So obviously before you used to do after school clubs, so the upcycle, recycle one for schools and things like that. So with the pandemic and the schools kind of closing down, what happened to Funkymakers?
Funkymakers hasn't been allowed back into school since. Still out, because all of the classes have to work in their class bubbles. So where the outdoor clubs have gone back, indoor clubs have not been able to go back just yet. So because all of my kids come from different classes, so I have kids from age 5, so they're year 1, so they're age 5 right up to year 6, which is 10 or 11. And because my clubs are mixed, they're not allowed because the kids have to stay in their class bubbles.
So that must have been a real shock when that happened. And I suppose even now, I mean, we don't know really what's going to happen in a couple of weeks' time, but certainly things may not even be back to normal in September. So
it's going to be interesting to see what does happen. But yes, I mean, it's been hard. And I've had so many of the parents contact me saying, when are you coming back? When can the kids craft again? And we've not been able to do that just yet.
So how did you, apart from the fact that, the children are missing out on a huge amount, aren't they? So they've missed out on a whole year of, learning to being able to relax and, play around with different materials and create something. How do you think that's impacted them?
Yeah, even from my own son's point of view, in his curriculum, that in the things that he's supposed to be doing, they have not had any practical lessons since the start of lockdown. So he has not done any cooking. He's not done any design tech. They've not done any science lab work. So they've been in one classroom, not moving around their school for the whole of the pandemic when they have been at school. And I think, across the board, I think it's going to damage children quite a bit. When you look at what the benefits of crafting are, from very young children right through to teenagers, my son's a teenager, You're talking about for young children, you're talking about their fine motor skills, their dexterity. You're talking about like problem solving. How do I stick that to that? Or how do I connect it? Using split pins or however. Just the whole like ideas that crafting generates. And they've lost all of that. They've lost those opportunities, and crafting is so good for expressing yourself, and it helps build self-esteem in the children. So it's one of my biggest enjoyments of doing what I do is seeing the pride and the sense of accomplishment that the children have in what they've made. And the fact that they are so eager to run out that door in the evening and show the parents what they've made, and that sense of pride, and it helps build confidence as well in children. But also, even on the flip side of that, crafting is a safe place to fail. So, if it doesn't work, well, what can you do to make it work? What can you do to fix it? What can you do? Just continually generates all of those ideas. And I think they've had the curriculum has become so academic in the last few years, maybe a bit more than a few years, but it's so academically focused that children don't get these opportunities anymore. There was an article in the, I think it was the Guardian a few weeks ago, by a lady called Catherine Milner, and she was talking about how with art, the government apparently have focused on music in schools and teaching music, but they're not focusing on art. But if you think about anything that starts out like, everything starts out with a picture or a drawing or an idea that's got to be sketched, a concept. And if we're not doing these arts and crafts with our children, we are going to lose a certain amount of technical innovation going forward. And we can't afford to lose that now. We're in such, just coming out of the pandemic, the number of businesses that have shut down. We need our children to move through their educational lives and be innovators, because there are so many issues that we have to solve in this world. We really do need them to have those creative ideas, and that starts basically with arts and crafts. I know education's got a certain amount to do with it as well, but with arts and crafts, you can build in the educational side, because some of the crafts that I do with the children, we'll be talking about exploring nature. We'll be talking about animals and their environments. One of the things that I've done with the kids is a little rag rug with scrap fabric of a hedgehog, and talking about hedgehogs are endangered in this country, and you talk to them about it. It's so good for facilitating conversations, and for children who learn in different ways. So we all learn in different ways. Some of us learn by reading, some of us learn visually, some people learn through listening, and some of the kids are very sensory, so they learn through feeling and working with the materials. I think they've lost an awful lot in this last year and a half by not being able to do that, and not having. And I mean, I know some parents are great and they do a lot of that at home with their children, but it's an awful lot easier to have someone else do that with your children.
Yeah.
I know that my own son, because me as a craft instructor, I've got a lot more patience with other people's children than I do with my own child.
And I think it's really interesting what you say about how it could affect. We need a lot of technical innovation to tackle the issues coming up, because I think a lot of people don't realize how important that this beginning stage of a child's career is to them becoming a scientist or a doctor or anything like that, because it's like building blocks, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And I was watching a TED Talks where they had to get a crafter to do an impression of an exact impression of a nose or something. This was for some kind of scientific thing. And they actually had to go back to a crafter to get them to create this so that they could, start the whole process of creating a nose,
And I mean, that's, I have heard that one. I think Annie Warburton of the Crafts Council was talking about that. And where they tried to speak to like commercial glass makers to make the nose, so it's to grow the skin grafts and bone, I think, to reconstruct someone's face, and they couldn't. The commercial glass makers couldn't actually come up with glass that was tolerant enough, and they had to go to a crafter. Someone who did hand blown glass to actually get what they needed in order to do what they wanted to do. But I mean, you just think, even from that perspective, plastic surgeons, they're reconstructing people's faces, so they just the modeling, or not just faces, but general surgery. But it's not only that. You just think about a surgeon, a doctor that needs to stitch someone back up again after an accident or whatever. And also, I've heard a story about a class of dentists, dental students that went to college. And on their first day, they were asked, who knows how to sew? And I think one person in the whole group of them put their hand up. So they sent the whole lot of them to a stitching class. And you think, these are the guys that are going to be fixing your teeth and do it, and you think they've never held a needle and thread in their hands.
To be honest, my mind's slightly being blown right now, because I was thinking of Michelangelo. Was he the one that made the flying machine?
Yes.
Was he yes. And he stuck feathers on it. So that's crafting, I've decided just now in my head. And I was also thinking about actually how lucky, I did crafting, so I can sew. And I remember, traveling, sewing a flower on my rucksack, and you can, it's something that once you've learned how to do it, it's very easy to do. But yes, so how the correlation between that and being a surgeon or a dentist or, sewing somebody up. And it's just insane, isn't it? So it's incredibly important, these kind of,
it's incredibly important.
And it gets their minds going about what they want to be and where they want to go in the future. I'm really fired up now. I don't know, you've got my imagination going.
And also it's the whole like mathematics side of it. And one of the things that with my kids when I'm teaching them knitting is, it's counting stitches. Let's say we're making a purse, and it's a very simple thing to make. So you've got like a rectangle. You're talking about shapes as well. So, you've got a rectangle, and then you've got a triangle bit, the flap that's going to close on the top, and then you'll stitch up the sides. And we're talking about the number of stitches we're going to. It's basic maths, but you're talking about the stitches you're going to decrease and increase, to create the various shapes.
Yeah. And knitting as well. 1 purl, 2 purl. Well, yeah. I don't know, but
Absolutely. If you're creating the rib for the bottom of a jumper, if you're knitting a jumper for your dolls, or your teddy bear, that's where I started. Was knitting for my toys, knitting blankets, knitting jumpers for my teddy bear, that sort of thing. But it is. You're incorporating so much more education into it, and a much more fun way for the children to learn than just learning academically.
Yes. So what's happened now that poor Funkymakers hasn't been allowed back in the school? So have you managed to put some of it online or?
Yes. So I initially did a course with Get Video Confident. So giving me quite a bit more confidence to record video and some of the technical elements of it. And then I moved on from there to do Tech Pixies, which is where we've met. We've both done the Tech Pixie course. And that's been absolutely brilliant because I was only ever on Facebook, both personally, and I just had a page for Funkymakers on Facebook. I didn't do a great deal with it. But now most of my stuff is on Instagram, learned about Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook, and also strategy and mindset. So it's been absolutely amazing. And that's pretty much what I did with myself for most of lockdown. And then I did launch. So I launched some workshops online. So I've done like a whole Halloween series last year. And I did some at Easter as well. This year I didn't do. I did individual workshops for Christmas. But I'm developing those much more now. So come September, there's going to be an online after school club, which will be a permanent online after school club with the projects mapped out.
Yeah.
So people will know what they're doing.
I think a lot of kids have gone online. I know that my nephew and niece have piano lessons via, the iPad. So I think that by having your course to do it like that as well, it'll be normal by then, won't it? Anyway, and they can do it from their home. And yes,
yeah, I do know that a lot of parents are concerned about the amount of time that their kids are spending online, but. If you are doing it in an environment and you do it in a safe environment, then it still, it still works very much like being in a classroom with the kids.
Yeah.
And I think the kids have adapted to learning online quite well, really. I mean, I have to say, it is much nicer being there in person and seeing them face to face.
Yeah.
But when it's needs must, and also the reach is so much bigger when you do it online. If someone is interested in what you do, then they don't have to be living within 5 miles of you to get to a class. So it's good. It's really good.
Yeah. So people can get on your Instagram and have a look nearer September to find out when those are coming out. Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you about, so you did mention that your granny kind of taught you to sew, and I saw that you made a heritage blanket for your cousin Kirsty and her husband, and it was made by 3 generations, which I thought was wonderful. Do you want to tell everyone about that?
Yeah, so we she's the youngest granddaughter in the family. So my mum came from a family of 15, Irish family of 15. So there's quite a few of them. And so we've got quite a large extended family. And I just came up with the idea of creating this blanket that all of us would be involved with. Kirsty lost her mum a few years ago. And I sort of just felt that we wanted to wrap the couple in love, and that was one of the ways of doing it from an Irish family. So I spoke to a number of my aunts and a number of my cousins, and we decided, yes, let's do it. Let's go for it. So we came up with a plan. We decided on a colour scheme. My nan had passed away by then, and I was looking for a piece of her work that we could incorporate into the blanket as well. So we did actually find another aunt of mine that doesn't knit or crochet. She had a cardigan that was knitted by my grandmother, and it didn't fit her anymore. So she gave us that. And so I used a technique called steeking, it's an Icelandic, like a Nordic, an Icelandic method of stitching, so that you can cut your knitted fabric then and the stitches don't fray. So I did that, and we cut all the squares out of the cardigan. So in the end, we had 70 squares that came from Ireland, the UK, Canada, Australia. So yeah. So it was amazing, absolutely amazing. And then I was the one who put it all together. I've obviously done some of the squares, and I put it all together, and then I put a border around it. So I crocheted a border around it, and
with lovely hearts, I can see
lots of hearts.
Yeah.
Yes, and their names and the date of the wedding as well. So
I think it's such a wonderful thing, like you said, you're wrapping them in your arms, so to speak. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and so lovely to use some knitting from your grandmother as well. So yeah, I mean, my mum is 85 now, and it's just this pinging with me so much, all of this, because she knits a lot. She knits cardigans for my nephew and niece, and even when the Cindy doll lost her clothes and she couldn't bear her being naked, so she knitted her like a hat and a dress to cover her up. But and I do knit, but I can't knit as well as she can knit, if you know what I mean. So it's definitely something that I have been able to do, but it would be so nice to know I could definitely do it later. And I think that you were talking about the importance for doing crafting as an adult. So could you tell us a bit more about those?
So, I mean, as far as crafting as an adult, I think everybody needs to sort of find something that works for them. And it's not necessarily always like, knitting and crochet and sewing and fabric crafts are my bag. But, crafting generally reduces stress. It's such a mindful activity. And for me, with knitting and crochet, you can pick up something that's quite simple, so that you can get into a pattern. You almost get into a rhythmic feel, which is almost close to meditation. So, you can just let things flow through your mind. Thoughts come and go because you're just sitting there working. Or if you don't want to think about whatever is going on in your life, you can pick something that's a lot more complex, that you really have to concentrate on. So something that might have an intricate pattern, some lace work on the crochet or the knitting, so that you can, that the only thing you can do is focus on that. And it just takes you away from whatever else is going on in the world, or whatever else is going on in your life, and it just gives your brain a break from all of that activity. So it's almost creativity for wellness.
Yeah.
But as adults as well, we still have the same need to have that sense of achievement. So when you've made something that you're really pleased with, you get it. It helps with building that self-esteem. And it's something as well that a number of GPs are actually recommending to people joining knitting groups or joining crochet groups or various craft groups in order to sort of achieve that. But it's amazing as well when you craft in a group. It's amazing the connection that you can have with other people, because the conversations that start can be quite different. Because if you're focusing on something that you're working on, but you're still involved in a conversation, well, actually, sometimes it's easier to have important conversations when you're not making eye contact as well. That also goes for children, actually, because that's a really good way of, especially teenagers, of communicating with teenagers is doing something with them. And in fact, Shelley Brander has written a book called Move the Needle, and she has a perfect example in that book of a teenage daughter who really reacted to the divorce of her parents, and the mum couldn't get through to her. And eventually, the only way she did manage to get through to her was to start knitting. They went to a knitting class together, and then they managed to have those conversations, those important conversations, and she could understand how her daughter was feeling and talk about those feelings. So it's, yeah, I mean, there's a multitude of benefits for crafting.
I think it's fun. I think it's just blowing my mind. It's all coming back to me. I have a knitting bag downstairs as well, because I did have done a few knitting things. I made my mum a little purse, which she has lovingly in her, she keeps with her, and one legging, not two, just one. She's still waiting for the second one. But it's really interesting because I don't think I've ever, I did do crafting at school together, but when you're an adult, it's not something I have done with other people, I don't think. But that's something that I think will really make people think about when they're listening to this, because there must be some all around the world that people can kind of join, that they could, I suppose it's being part of a community as well, isn't it? Really?
Yes. Yeah, very much so, being part of a community. And there's a lot of craft groups out there at the moment that are crafting for good as well.
Yes.
Because it's another role that I hold is that I'm head of crafting and upcycling for Greener and Cleaner Bromley. And we have we've had one only since we've come out of lockdown. But before lockdown, we used to get together and we used to make things like vegetable bags from old net curtains, things like that, reusing things so that people have bags that they can go and pick their veg up in the supermarkets when they're not in plastic. But also more recently, I've become involved in a movement called Stitch It, Don't Ditch It, which is trying to just regenerate that love of our clothes that we're wearing, and that if a button falls off or if it's got a little tear, then try and repair it, and by repairing it, you can make something individual to you. It's not. We don't have to necessarily follow all the trends. But you can update clothing to make it look trendy as well. If you've got a particular trend where there's an embroidery going down the side of the leg of the jeans or something, you can adapt the clothes that you've already got. We don't need to keep making and fueling the sort of consumerism and not valuing the resources that we have in this world. The amount of resources that go into making, I mean, even cotton, there's I know there's organic cotton that you can get now, but the amount of resources that go into generating all of these clothes is quite massive.
The Stitch It, Ditch It, Don't Ditch It looked really, really interesting. I've got a couple of pictures on your Instagram I can see next to me, which is what I was pointing at. But because it's so weird to see on my screen, you couldn't really tell what I was doing. I was like, yes, she's going to talk about that next. But it looked great. And I presume that was mainly adults as well that were part of that. And even though you weren't in the same area, it was like you'd created a community to work together for a cause. So, I mean, another fantastic thing. And the bags for vegetables, I think that's great. We could all do with some of those as well, couldn't we? So
yes. I mean, the same group got involved in making PPE as well for even recycling fabrics, but then sheets and pillowcases and
into the tunics and everything.
Yeah. I didn't get too involved on that. I was doing other stuff at the time, but parts of our Greener and Cleaner group were making face masks and making the PPE tops and bottoms as well during at the beginning of the pandemic, and reusing fabric for that. So but generally, with the Greener and Cleaner, we just try to show and talk about the sustainability element, and we talk about things like clothes. We're buying 5 times more clothes than we did 40 years ago, and that's in my lifetime. To be buying, we don't need to. If we survived back then with 5 times less clothes, we certainly don't need the number of clothes that we buy now. And the average wear of a garment is 7 times, apparently, before it goes whether it goes to landfill or but before it leaves your wardrobe, the average wear is 7 times, which is that's not a lot.
I definitely have items which is 1 time, if I'm perfectly honest, but they're the party dress. And then I've got my jeans, which I wear and wear and wear. Then they all kind of fall apart. So but then you're left with the shorts at the top, and you cut off the bottom bits because there's been a rip and then So I need to get some tips on how to use the shorts again. But I wanted to say that I think that the Greener and Cleaner Bromley, what you did at that time, for making the PPE and stuff like that, was great because it gave people a community to work together to create something. And things obviously now we're not still through the pandemic and we're coming to the end, but there's a lot of changes happening, aren't there? So I think a lot of people will be finding the next couple of months quite tricky, and maybe they could pick up a knitting needle and get knitting. Would you recommend?
Oh, absolutely. I will have classes going on from September, but there are so many resources online. I have on my Instagram page, there is a quick tutorial for learning how to crochet in a circle, which you can make reusable makeup pads so that you're not buying like the cotton ones or using cotton wool. So there's that on there. But there are so many resources online for learning how to knit, how to crochet, how to sew. And I'm always sharing, other people's, colleagues or other crafters' work as well on my Instagram page when, for people who want to find another craft and explore their creativity.
The crocheted makeup remover pads, that sounds absolutely fantastic. So the other thing, just before we go, was obviously during lockdown, I think a lot more people did get into crafting and were buying more and more stuff. What would you recommend to somebody just starting out? How should they avoid buying lots of new things to get set up?
You can buy yarn in a lot of charity shops. So I definitely check out the charity shops for yarn. I'd also, if you were going to buy new, try and buy natural fibres rather than the acrylics and polyesters, if you can. It doesn't always work for children because those natural fibres are quite expensive. So, if you're making something that the child's sort of that might not last very long, then obviously parents can't afford that. But the charity shops are great for finding and even for finding fabrics. I think getting teens to, rather than just buy the next thing online, because that's the other thing is shopping has gone online now, and a lot of people don't send things back. So if they buy something that doesn't fit or they don't like it because it's they haven't tried it on in person, and in some cases I've known some of my friends' teenage daughters, they're not even sending it back so that somebody else could wear it or buy it. So check out the charity shops, see if you can find things that you can upcycle. Great ways to upcycle is stitching, and also, but you might be able to use those fabrics to make something completely different. Create a flower or something that you can stitch onto a garment. and explore your creativity, really. But for young children, for knitting and stitching, you know, a little pair of bamboo needles and a ball of yarn. I teach finger knitting as well, actually. So they don't even they just need a ball of yarn. So some of the first kids that come to me when they're 5, they do finger knitting and then progress through. And we use a loom. I teach them how to make a loom from a roll of the inside of a toilet roll, the sort of the tube, and lollipop sticks that you just put around the outside. And you know, I don't know if you know the old French knitting.
You go up the middle, I think so.
Yeah, so the French knitting where you just create a cord, and so we create the loom, effectively a bigger version of the loom with the toilet roll and 6 lollipop sticks around the outside. And then they just knit a tube, and they're just pulling one stitch over the next one, loop over the next loop, and it just grows and grows and grows and grows. And we do various things with them. With the tubes. So some of the older kids will actually roll it up into a spiral and make a cushion cover with it. Some of the younger kids will just make a necklace or like scarf or out of it, so like a scarf for their dolls or whatever out of it. But it's a great way to start. It's a really good way to start.
Yeah, they honestly, it's bringing back everything, and I'm just like, oh yes, ping, ping, ping. Charlotte, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really interesting. It's got my imagination going, and hopefully it's given people something to think about and maybe reach for their knitting needles again. Do you have any last bits of advice for everyone to kind of get through the next couple of months using crafting as a technique?
Well, you've got the kids' summer holidays coming up, haven't you? So, yeah, I mean, just try and explore, you know, what the kids can do with crafting. Have a look at my Instagram page. If you go back, like over the last year, there's lots of tutorials on there. And in fact, I did last Christmas, during the whole of December, I did a crafting advent calendar. A lot of those techniques can actually be used, reused in other ways. They're not just necessarily Christmas ideas. So you'll find lots of ideas on there. There's a craft for every day of December for Advent. So you'll find lots of ideas on there, and you can reuse the same techniques to do something that's current.
I think that you may have saved a few parents' lives. So yeah, if you go back in Charlotte's feed to Christmas, so it's 25 days of, or 24, I don't know if you did one on Christmas Day, of tutorials. So, and you can reuse them. Charlotte, thank you very much, and have a great summer holiday. I know you're actually going on one to see your family, and
yes.
Good luck with the workshops back in September. Take care. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.